whenever you decide that there are no more movies to be made by George Lucas, and you look back at a body of work, are you going to say, Star Wars was my crowning achievement, cinematically?
Cinematically, I'd say probably yes.
Yes, okay. In what way is it not your crowning achievement?
I don't know. Again, it's hard to, you know, I have a pretty low opinion of my movies. So to me, I've always said, well, these didn't really turn out the way I'd hoped they would. And, you know, and I can see all the flaws and I can see all the stuff. I mean, American Graffiti is the most fun movie I made in terms of what I created. The most fun movie to work on was Indiana Jones because I didn't have to direct it.
Yes, Stephen.
Yeah, I had the best director in the world. It turned out better. That was the one where everything went right. Yeah. Which happens very rarely in real life. You know, but it just gets better and better and better, and you just can't believe how wonderful it turns out. The other ones you suffer through, and you think they're terrible, and then people say, oh, they're great. But it's hard to get that they're actually terrible, because I can see all the Scotch tape and the rubber bands and everything holding it together. And it was just particularly true of Star Wars #4, because, you know, it barely got made. And I was so disappointed about what my vision was and what it actually turned out to be. And I complained about it a lot right after the movie when, you know, in the interviews you see that I was like, it came out to be 35% of what I wanted and all this kind of stuff. But I did have a vision, but my vision was way beyond what was possible. And I did the best I could. And then after a lot of people said, well, this is the greatest movie of all time, you have to, and I said, well, okay, maybe it's pretty good, and we'll live with that. And then part of it then was to continue the story. It was just a thing to finish the story. And then after that, I worked on the technology, and I said, well, gee, now I can tell the backstory, because the backstory seems to have gotten lost. When it was one movie, it was much easier to see the backstory of Darth Vader, because it was only
but
one
didn't
movie.
you intend to, in the beginning, create really 3 movies when you started? And then you decided only to take one part of that life story.
Yeah, I took the first act.
Exactly.
And
there
then
were 3 acts, and you took the first.
Yeah, but then the first act didn't really work. So I said, okay, what I'm going to have to do is take the ending of the 3rd film and put it on the first film. You know, which you do. You've got a bunch of stuff sitting on your desk as you're creating it. So, well, let me take that and stick that in here and make it. So I wasn't worried that much about the sequels when I was actually making it, because I have to make this the best film. You know, because I want this one to succeed and work. So then when I moved on to the other ones, I said, well, gee, you know, Ben Kenobi is now dead. I killed him. Or that was unfortunate. How am I going to fix that? And what am I going to do about the fact that I already blew the Death Star up? And that's what the ending is. And what, you know, so I went through, and so the story stretched itself and moved around. You know, it is a creative process where you're kind of doing things and you maneuver through your imagination. But part of it was simply, when I got down to some of the other movies, I was able to create an environment and a world that wasn't possible when I started the first one. So to me, a lot of the things were just technical, or, you know, in the end, getting Yoda to do a sword fight, which I'd always wanted to do, but I could never do it, because he was a Muppet.
You said famously, Flash Gordon was the inspiration and the Bible.
Well, it wasn't the Bible by a long shot. It was the inspiration. But at the same time with Flash Gordon, it was better. I knew I wanted to make a movie based on those serials, but I didn't, you know, it wasn't going to be Flash Gordon. So I did try to get the rights to Flash Gordon, couldn't, but that was good. Because if I had, it would have set me off on a funny thing. But because I realized after I didn't get it, I said, well, I really don't want Flash Gordon. I don't want to do I want a space opera that's like Flash Gordon. But if I were making that movie, I would probably take Flash Gordon out of it, and I'd take all that stuff, Mongo and all that stuff. I don't want to do that stuff. Because what I really wanted to do was more on the lines of Star Wars and less on the lines of Flash Gordon. There is a similarity between the two, but there is definitely a difference in perspective about how they're doing. So that sent me in the right direction of having to think up something completely new. but inspired by. But of course, inspired by Westerns, and people go through and say these are all
Westerns.
the inspirations that were influenced Star Wars, and they are. Just like whether you're a writer, no matter what, you're a painter, whether you're a politician, in theory, you have steeped yourself in the genre you're working in, and you know all the various kinds of things, and you can pull the best parts of what of what you've learned in theory, but it works everywhere except it seems in politics, because they are doomed to repeat themselves every few years because they do not listen to history. Where
did the idea of force come from?
The whole thing in Star Wars was to take, ideas, psychological ideas, from social issues, political issues, spiritual issues, and condense them down into an easy-to-tell story of those stories. The Force basically came from, distilling all of the religious beliefs, spiritual beliefs, go all around the world, all through time, finding the similarities, and then creating an easy to deal with metaphor for what religion is. And the point is that in the very beginning, when you have people worshiping rocks and deer, they called it life force. They called it the Force. Right. That's what it was. And so where did the name come from? It came from basically life force of what the more primitive religions believed in. And then you go through all the other religions, and they have the same thing. It's all the same. Whether you believe in God, don't believe in God, believe in religion, don't believe in religion. The issue is that you either don't believe there's anything else out there, which is a little, I think, would be hard to live with at the same time. I believe something's out there, I just don't know what it is. I have no idea, or would I dare to guess, but I do know that religions aren't based on it. They're human psychological needs that have been put together mostly to create a society.
But you believe something's out there.
Yeah.
So here's what's interesting to me about Star Wars 2. To hear you talk about it, this was a very personal film.
Yeah.
Very.
Yeah, well, all my films are personal because I thought them up, I did them, and you can say, well, but Star Wars is just for a kiddies movie. I said, the idea of making it for kids, the idea that it was a fun kiddie movie, all that stuff was very important to me. I like that sort of thing, and I like Star Wars. And I did it not because I thought it was going to make any money, because, as I say, in the end, we finished it, we showed it to the board of directors of Fox, and they hated it. And I had an ally at the head of the studio, and he fought for me and got it through there, but nobody thought it was going to be a hit, especially me.
Okay, so personal film becomes among other things, a blockbuster.
Right, well, and again, it was the second time, because American Graffiti was a very personal film.
And also, Star Wars became a cultural mainstay, as we've said. And here's what Steven said. He said, it is the moment in which the entire industry changed. Star Wars is the moment when the industry changed.
Well, it changed for the good and for the bad.
Yeah.
And, it's again, when you invent things, well, you don't invent things, I don't know. But when you bring new things into a society, you can either, it's like the balance of the Force. Yeah. You can either use it for good or you can use it for evil. And what happens when there's something new, people have a tendency to overdo it. They abuse it. Now, there were two things that got abused with Star Wars, and it's still being abused. One, when Star Wars came out, everybody said, oh, it's a silly movie, it's just a bunch of space battles and stuff. It's not real. There's nothing behind it. And I said, well, there is stuff behind it. It's not just a space battle. There's more to it than that. It's much, much more complicated than that. But nobody would listen. So they just said, oh, well, it's simple, and we like the spaceships, we like the stuff. So they said, fine. So the spaceships and that part of the science, fantasy, whatever, got terribly abused. And of course, everybody went out and made spaceship movies. And they were all horrible, and they all lost tons of money. And you say, well, you know, there's more to it than that. You can't just go out and do spaceships. And the other part was which is the technology, which is, oh, we'll just take this new technology. It's great. You know, especially when it came down later to digital technology, where you can really do anything. And then people just abused it all over the place, which they did with color, they did with sound. Whenever there's a new tool, everybody goes crazy, and they forget the fact that there's actually a story, and that's the point. You're telling a story using tools. You're not using tools to tell a story, if you understand that.
I do.
The point was, the other thing that got abused, naturally in a capitalist society, especially in an American point of view, which is the studios and everything said, well, wow, we can make a lot of money. This is a license to kill. And they did it. They just simply, and of course, the only way you can really do that is not take chances. Only do something that's proven. Let's not do any, you gotta remember, Star Wars came from nowhere. American Graffiti came from nowhere. There was nothing like it. Now, if you do anything that's not a sequel, or not a TV series, or it doesn't look like one, they won't do it. They say, we want something that we know.
So that's the downside of Star Wars.
That's the downside of Star Wars, and it really shows an enormous lack of imagination and fear of creativity on the part of an industry. I mean, corporations are not known for, you know, maybe not Silicon Valley, but the old institutions are not known for being they're known for being risk averse. And movies are not risk averse. Every single movie is a risk, a big risk. I like to say, you know, it's like the movie business is exactly like professional gambling, except you hire the gambler, usually some crazy kid with long hair who's like, I don't get this guy at all. You give him $100 million, and you say, go to the tables and come back with $500 million. That is a risk. Now, the studios don't want to think of it that way. They say, well, maybe if we told him that he couldn't bet on red, maybe if we told him, because we did market research and we realized that red wasn't, so they tried to minimize their risk. But once and of course, you're hiring the kid to take risks, to be creative, to do things that have never been done before, never been tested. You have no idea whether they're going to work or not. That's completely the antithesis of what a big modern corporation is. You know, they want to test things 360 ways. You know, no, you just go out
So
and
Hollywood is not like a big American corporation because it'll just throw money away behind somebody and have him go or her go and figure out.
But they don't know. They don't know how to do that because they're basically corporate types. They think the worst thing that happens when they think they know how to do it. Then they start making decisions that ensure that it's not going to work.
But you're George Lucas, and you were ahead of your time with American Graffiti. You were ahead of your time with Star Wars. Have you been ahead of your time since then?
Well, you know, I haven't directed a movie since then.
I know that.
Producing, I don't know. I was sort of ahead of my time with Red Tails. You know, an all-black film.
But you're the only person who could have got that made somehow.
Well, I paid for it myself.
Daniel Yellow said
they wouldn't distribute it. They wouldn't make it. They wouldn't advertise it.
Because of racism or because of what?
They just said, the market research says nobody will go to that movie.
There you go.
And in Europe, nobody will go see a
But
film
market
about
research
black
said
people.
nobody would go to Star Wars. Market research may have said no one.
Well, but this one was.
Okay.
We know there is a certain now over time, a lot of these issues that were just becoming. They were dimly aware of them, have become institutionalized. Now they know that movie will do well in France, this movie will do well in Denmark, this movie you can't do in Asia. And they got their markets, they know how much of the share they get, and they do their little analysis, and then they say, well, we will or will not make the movie. It has nothing to do with what I do, which is make a movie, something that people can enjoy.
Okay.
It has nothing to do with that. I made money in spite of myself. And I think I made money because I didn't care. I didn't care whether it was a hit or not a hit. I wanted to make this movie as a movie. And that's the thing that they won't do. And that they can't do it. It's not in their constitution to do that. I have a fiduciary duty to come up with a thing. I got it 10% a year, my stockholders. That's why I would never go public. And that's why I said, I'm not going to be beholden to anybody. And that's why even now with the company, when I sold it, one of the reasons I sold it was I was starting to make movies that were more personal and were obviously losing a lot of money. And I said, I really can't do this much more because the company will be dragged down. And I had 2,000 employees. So I had people to think about. So I said, the best way to handle this is to sell it and then take the money, put it in a bank account. I call it my yacht because a lot of my friends have yachts. I said, I'm not going to buy a yacht, but I'll take the money that I would use to have a yacht and I'll put it in a bank account.
Right.
And I will use that to make movies that I know are experimental, that I have no way of knowing whether they'll work or not, but I want to see if they work. And that means I don't have to show them to an audience. I don't have to have people.
So when are we going to see that movie?
You're not. You might. But you're in a world now where everything is, well, first of all, those movies, they don't make money. And you can't, like Red Tail's perfect example. Not only does it not make money, you can't get anybody to distribute it. You can't get anybody to put any advertising money behind it. You can't, so it loses money no matter how you do it. So why in the world go through all that, get bad reviews, get all the, crazy people yelling and screaming at you? Why not just make the movie for yourself and your friends?
And that's where you are in your life today.
Yeah, I'm
That's
doing
exactly
what I
where you
wanted
are.
to do back when I started, but I'm going to learn things, and the things I learn, possibly I'll pass on to other friends of mine and other people who are directors to say, I didn't know you could do that, because that's what directors do. They learn from what all their peers are doing. I'm doing this and I'm doing. You sort of see how they manipulate film, the visual image, moving image, and do things that have never been done before. And so that's what I want to do, because in the movie business, you cannot take a risk. You cannot do something that doesn't work. You don't get a second chance. I've taken second chances, but I've just taken to polish them. But at the same time, there's no experimenting. There's no experimenting in the movies. What you do is every day on the set, what you're doing has to be right. If it's not right, and you make the mistake enough, the film will fail. If the film fails, then the people lose their money, and you usually don't get another job.
But are you telling me, and is this what you believe today, that in your life's experience, you know how to make a popular movie, but that's just not what you want to do at this stage in your life?
Yeah. Why would I?
You don't need the money.
I don't need the money. My interests have shifted to more mature things. I mean, I did the kids thing. I did it. To me, it's 6 films, and
And why do you say the kids thing?
Well, it is a kids film. Adults like it. It's for everybody, obviously. But the kinds of movies I'm going to make now are much more demanding of an audience, and most of the audience won't have anything to do with it. And it's on subject matter that most people don't want to see movies about. So, but I do. And, I've made movies for me that I wanted to see, but I knew what they were. I said, okay, this is this movie, this is this movie, this is this movie. And in producing films, where I was able to get other people to put their money in, studios, I wouldn't take it from real people, I'd only take it from corporations. So, it's a little bit of the Robin Hood thing.
Yes, I know. Let me just talk about the upcoming Star Wars, The Force Awakens. How do you feel about it?
Well, it's, I made the decision to sell the company with Star Wars. I made that decision because I looked at the future, I looked at the fact that I was going to have a baby, I looked at the fact that I was married, and I looked at the fact that I wanted to build a museum, and I looked at the fact that I wanted to make experimental films. So my life was going on a different track. I noticed the last few movies that I'd made were costing the company a lot of money, and I didn't think that was fair to the people that worked there or the company. And so I had made a decision to move ahead on the next Star Wars series, and we were starting to do that.
So you were starting to make the next Star Wars.
Yeah.
You as director, filmmaker.
So, and we were working with a writer. It wasn't quite working out, but I was also, you know, I was also stepping away a little bit to, and turning things over to Kathy Kennedy. And so what happened was Disney said, gee, or Bob Iger said, gee, if you really want to sell your company, if you're thinking about selling it, because we were talking about retirement and what are you going to do after all this kind of stuff. And he said, well, if you really want to sell it, you know, we're very interested. So that started that ball rolling. And I knew from, you know, and I had the story treatments or, you know, outlines, and we were we were working on scripts. And so I sold it. But I knew when I sold it, I said, I've tried to make movies where I step away, to sort of Empire and Return of the Jedi.
Right, right.
And after about a couple of weeks, I knew I couldn't do that. I had to stand over the shoulder of the director, help him, you know, whisper in his ear constantly, no, do this, do that, you know, and be there to help guide it. And it was much harder than if I had just directed it myself.
J.J. Abrams?
J.J. Abrams, he's a good director and he's a good friend and all this sort of thing. But he's also a top director, company, his own company and all this other stuff. And Disney, who was a little nervous, you know, one of the issues was the first three movies had all kinds of issues. They looked at the stories and they said, we want to make something for the fans. So I said, all I wanted to do was tell a story of what happened. You know, it started here and it went there. And it's all about generations and it's about, you know, the issues of fathers and sons and grandfathers. And it's a family soap opera. I mean, ultimately. I mean, we call it space opera, but people don't realize it's actually a soap opera. Yeah. And it's all about family problems and that it's not about spaceships. So they decided they didn't want to use those stories. They decided they were going to go do their own thing, and so I decided, fine, but basically I'm not going to try to, they weren't that keen to have me involved anyway, but at the same time I said, I'm not going to, if I get in there, I'm just going to cause trouble, because they're not going to do what I want them to do, so, and I don't have the control to do that anymore, and all I would do is muck everything up. So I said, okay, I will go my way and I'll let them go their way. And it really does come down to a simple rule of life, which is when you break up with somebody, the first rule is no phone calls. The second rule, you don't go over to their house and drive by to see what they're doing. Yes. The third one is you don't show up at their coffee shop or the things what you're going to burn it. You just say, no, gone, history, I'm moving forward. Because every time you do, and you know, we all learn this from experience, every time you do something like that, you're opening the wound again. And it just makes it harder for you. You have to put it behind you, and it's a very, very, very hard thing to do. But you have to just cut it off and say, okay, end the ball game. I got to move on. And everything in your body says, don't, you can't. And these are my kids. So
all those Star Wars films.
All the Star Wars films.
They were your kids.
Yeah, well, they are my, you know, I loved them, I created them. I'm very intimately involved in them, and obviously to
and
sell
you
them
sold
off,
them.
I sold them to the white slavers that take these things and
Okay, but I mean, but having said all that, and having talked to you for the last, and known you for a while, and admired you, I mean, it must hurt you.
Well, no,
it's your family. It's the last story. It's your story.
But
it's
in the end,
you.
But I knew there's 3 more stories, and I knew that was going to probably take, you know, to do it right would take about 10 years. And I said, I'm 70. I don't know whether I'll be here when I'm 80. You know, every 10 years the odds get less. And so I said, and I'm not ready to do that because I want to do these other things. So I have to make the decision on my own that it's time for me to move on. So it wasn't like they were taken away from me or they were and they felt they knew, you know, they wanted to do a retro movie. I don't like that. Every movie I worked very hard to make them different. I make them completely different with, you know, different planets, with different spaceships, with different, you know, to make it new.
So are you at peace with this?
Yeah.
As much as you can be.
Yeah, no, I said, look, I'm fine. Then you get to the thing, which is another thing that I'd been through. Fortunately, I'm old enough to have been through all this stuff before. And that one, as I say, I had to do it. And then you do end up with this thing, which is, you know, you got to live with it, and people are going to talk about it and all that kind of stuff. It's like talking about your divorce or something. It's awkward, but it's not painful.
Do you have within you something that's a series of small personal films, you've said? That's what you want to do. No more great Star Wars kind of adventure for George Lucas.
No.
That's over.
Yeah. These are little tiny movies that are experimental. They aren't using the same structure. I'm going back to where American Graffiti was, or THX, where I've completely changed the way you tell a story in using cinema. It's back. I've produced a few films that were like this, but they weren't like what I would do. But they were using the visual style rather than the book.
Here's what's exciting, George. What's exciting is that all of the stuff that's within you that made all of this, whether it's THX or American Graffiti or Star Wars or all that you contributed to Indiana Jones, it's all within you. It's who you are, and you can apply that in any way. Because that, in the end, is what you brought. It is your ideas and your insight is what you brought to film.
And at the same time, I've been fascinated with the medium, and I've been fascinated with the true nature of the medium, which is very different. It's been used more as a recording medium than as a art form unto itself. And that's where the kind of movies that I made that are sort of, they call them tone poems. But in the beginning, like in Russia, this was a whole movement of how do you tell visual stories basically without dialogue, without all the things that you use to tell a story, and you just use the film itself. It's kind of esoteric. I'm going to try to take it. It hasn't come much further in 100 years. I'm going to try to take it into something that is more emotionally powerful than most of the stuff we've done up to this point.
Thank you for doing this.
All right. Thank you.